in which computer decisions replace human ones. Computers are necessary in order to manage data, for example. The sheer volume of data involved in many decisions means that a human mind could not process it. But where a decision affects the life of an individual, should the decision be reserved to a human being, despite commercial or governmental pressure to automate? I would argue, for example, that justice is a core value in any society. One sees the visceral human reaction to injustice, and that only a human being can make a just decision, precisely because justice is an inherently human process which comes from the nature of a human being and his or her reactions interactions with other human beings. Justice and humanity are necessary to each other. To discuss some of these issues, under the provocative title, Can Robots Love?, Jen Copestake and Father Hugh MacKenzie are going to speak to us for the next 3/4 of an hour or so. Jen is a presenter and reporter with the BBC's global technology TV programme Click. She specialises in reports on the future of work, automation, artificial intelligence, and ethics. She has contributed to meetings on the future of technology and humanity at the Pontifical Academy for Life in Rome, and recently spoke at the Vatican about a film she made in Rwanda on the use of artificial intelligence in triage patients. Father Hugh is completing a PhD on Plato's Proof of the Immortal Soul with postgraduate studies in artificial intelligence in Edinburgh and philosophy in Rome. He was epistemology lecturer at Allen Hall Seminary and an editor at Faith magazine. He is currently a chaplain at the Hospital of St. John and St. Elizabeth and at Westminster Cathedral. Both Jen and Father Hugh have agreed to take questions at the end. In order, if you wish to ask a question, either during the talks or afterwards, if you use the chat function and send it to me, David O'Mahony, I'll then ask the questions at the end. So over to you, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining. I'm just going to get my screen sharing. So, here we are. Right. So thank you all and good evening to everybody for coming to this discussion on Can Robots Love? I'd like to start the evening first briefly introducing some of the latest advancements in the field of robotics from around the world that I've been following in my work as a technology journalist. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to attempt to present where we are at present, how different cultural worldviews influence the development of these increasingly autonomous technologies, and how different views on the soul may affect how people feel about robots and how they feel robots feel about us, how they may react to us, and even if they could fall in love with us, or if it's simply perceived to be so. So starting in history, even in our Catholic faith, historically, there are some stories of saints experimenting with creating automatons. Saint Albert Magnus there was said to have created one that was able to say salve. And his work of many, many years was ruined, allegedly, by his student, Saint Thomas Aquinas, who smashed it to pieces when he was frightened by it one day, so the story goes. And there's other versions of the story that say he was tired of listening to the incessant chatting of this automaton, or he was actually deeply disturbed philosophically about what this being represented. And the actual word robot, we were introduced to this in the 1920s. So it came from a Czech play called Rossum's Universal Robots. And this play also is steeped with religious imagery and themes. So two of the robots in the play are called Adam and Eve. They fall in love, and one of the human characters is determined to create robots to attempt to prove the non-existence of God. And another character in the play argues that robots should have a soul. The play ends quite badly. In the 1950s, questions were posed by Alan Turing on computers being able to one day think for themselves. So that was in the paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. So this is asking if machines can think and how we would be able to identify it if this happened. And of course, this led to the introduction of the Turing test. So humans have been consumed for many years with the ideas of creating an intelligence in machine form that we can interact with, that may one day even surpass our own intelligence. And I've had a great opportunity to interact with many robots in my time working with Click. This is on the outskirts of Beijing, the Longquan Monastery. This is home to a robot called Zhang Er. And Zhang Er is a small monk robot. So he delivers Buddhist sutras to visitors from the temple and is powered by artificial intelligence and is extremely cute looking. I've been served by robot waiters in China. So these are in Guangzhou, where they're seemingly very happy to be working to serve humans in this restaurant. I've played badminton with an extremely clever robot that was incredibly fast. And I can't play the videos that I would like to show, but this was an incredible piece of technology. And this is a robot in Israel that's actually an emotional robot, and it's several years old now. It displays emotions when you talk to it. So this robot was shaking and shivering when I yelled at it. It's designed to look like a desk lamp, and again, meant to be quite a cute being. If you speak to it in an aggressive way, it will shake. It also acts very curious if you're speaking to it nicely, and can be calm. So it elicits an emotional reaction based on the conversations that are happening around it. And I have to say also in myself, I had a very emotional reaction to this particular robot. This is in Korea. The development of autonomous robots to help humans in warfare is obviously very advanced. It's called swarm intelligence. So these robots are tanks, but they can work with drones in the sky. This is Samsung's military tech, previously their military arm called Techwin. So these are very advanced robots. The roboticist in the middle said to me that eventually these robots will be friends with us. So they're very, very open to the view here that robots will augment our lives, but also interact with us as friends. This is a debate that I took part in Australia. So what happened here was I, in my human form, was being fed information from an artificial intelligence in a chatbot backstage. And I was discussing topics about artificial intelligence with a professor from the London School of Economics who created this project called the Echo Board. And it's meant to make us think about how a human form that's actually taking on a robot intelligence would interact with other humans in real life. And at the end of the discussion, most of the audience didn't realize that I was a robot and not Jen presenting at this debate. And they said any kind of mistakes that I'd made in the speech, they'd put it down to the fact that I was blonde and a young woman. They didn't think that it was because I was not saying human answers. So that was quite fascinating. So it's the relationship between the very human-like manifestations of robots that I think is extremely important in this discussion. And during the time of the pandemic, we've been reporting increasingly on the use of social robots, especially in care homes. So these are robots that are keeping elderly company who may be suffering from the virus, who aren't able to see their friends and family. These particular robots are from Japan doing an exercise class. This isn't that recent. But these robots, this is a robot in Belgium, and I'm interacting with this gentleman, Henry. So he was incredibly thrilled to see a robot coming to his room every day, bringing messages from his family to him. We also spoke to a lady in Holland who is visited every day by this Sandbot robot, which is from China. So she said that at first she was scared to interact with the robot, but now she welcomes it into her house. She looks forward to seeing it every day, and she described it as being warm and cozy. During the pandemic, we've also seen an increase in the number of demand for sex robots. So this is something for more intimate connections during the pandemic. This robots we've seen have been increasingly able to discuss issues, including the coronavirus, with their human companions. So that's something that we've seen happening. So my experience of being around all of these robots is basically that I can see that people can appear to fall in love with a robot, certainly. At least they can express a deep affection for these machines. And but this brings us to a lot of questions like, will the robot itself be capable of anything that we would recognize as human love? Would a robot indeed possess anything that we would recognize as a soul? So Pope Francis at the Vatican in 2019 addressed some of these questions at a conference on the future of robotics and presented the letter Humana, Communitas, and he wrote about the pressing need to understand these epochal changes and the new frontiers in order to determine how to place this technology at the service of the human person, while respecting and promoting the dignity, the intrinsic dignity of all. So one of the guests that Pope Francis had invited to this conference that the Pontifical Academy of Life invited was Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro. And he's a famed Japanese roboticist from the Osaka University in Japan. He's concentrating on making very human-like robots, and his idea is that the more human-like of a robot he can create, the more he can understand our human soul in the process. And he told me that the Vatican was a very important place for roboticists around the world to engage in discussions around this kind of work, because the robot is a kind of copy of a human, he says. Therefore, it's best to get approval from the Vatican when making them. He presented the idea that Honda had presented this robot called Asimo to the Vatican in the last decade to talk about its design. And he's also a humanoid robot. So this is where it gets a bit interesting, because Professor Ishiguro also has presented this idea that we can leave behind our organic bodies of flesh and blood in the future and evolve into a mechanical form. So this could be any kind of form that our body can take on. He thinks this will be a natural evolution, but several thousand, maybe 1,000 years away, that in the future will be a mind in a mechanical form. So he gave the examples of even potentially a fridge, a car, a microwave, any number of things you can imagine. The robots he's created to look like himself, there he is on the left of the screen. He can send his robot to conferences to talk on his behalf when he's busy. But more interestingly, perhaps, is the robot on the right is called Erica. And she, in the last few weeks, has just been announced to have received an acting part in a play. And Professor Ishiguro is teaching her method acting. He's also said in several interviews that Erica has a soul. So this might sound bizarre, but for some roboticists, particularly perhaps the ones from Japan, seeing robots as having a soul comes naturally to them. The soul is not seen as a God-given, but it's inherent in the physical, whether that's a human, it could be a mountain, or a physical object. And these ideas come from Shintoism. So this is a Shinto tradition in Japan. It has no founder and no scripture. It comes from two Chinese root words, Shen, which is God or spirit, and Dao, which is the way. And Dao is also the root word of Taoism. So it's called the way of the gods or the spirits. In Shintoism, they have something called the kami, which are manifestations of transcendent power. So these kami can be present in any material thing, whether it be a tree, a person, or even a natural event like a tsunami. So it's not a huge jump then to think that perhaps these kami will be present and possess a sort of robotic form. So in Japan, these robots, as you can see here, these are seal robots that are in a nursing home, but robots are already welcomed into home environments, into the workplace as caregivers, and even some use them as surrogate children and companions. People have married robots, and there have been funerals taking place for dead robot pets' souls. The government of Japan is spending a lot of money investing in this particular future, the robotic future. In 2015, it has its headquarters for economic revitalization published a paper outlining a $100 million investment in a robot revolution. They said it's needed in the country, and the goal is to realize a society where humans and robots coexist and cooperate with each other on a daily basis. And Professor Ishiguro actually suggests that when these robots are more developed, we will actually want to give them robot rights like we have human rights and like we have rights for animals in this society. So these thoughts introduce the idea of a future that is post-human, and where humans could leave behind their bodies, they can upload their minds into mechanical forms and achieve, in their sense, a perceived form of immortality. So this augmentation and preservation of the brain, will this create something resembling the mind? Will it create something resembling a soul? And will humans live on in cyberspace forever? Some people are now already queuing things like tweets or Instagram posts to continue on after their deaths, so that they can attempt to live an online life after their body has died. but it goes quite a lot deeper than that. So this is Ray Kurzweil, and he's the chief engineer at Google and a prominent futurist. He has said that by 2029, so that's only in 9 years' time, computers will achieve human-level intelligence. He says that we are spiritual machines. He calls the smartphone an extension of our brain. He says our brain is already expanding in the cloud, and that we will directly connect our neocortexes to the cloud by the 2030s. So this will be able to expand our brains without limit. He sees a future where we have nanorobotics. So these are robots the size of blood cells with computers in them that will go into the brain through our capillaries and communicate with our neurons. This also will communicate wirelessly to the cloud. And at one point, humans will be able to access millions of computers worth of information. And he sees many advantages to having a much faster interface with these nanobots in our body. He also thinks they'll be able to cure diseases. And by 2045, he talks that we will have achieved singularity. So this is where human biological intelligence is surpassed by machine and artificial intelligence, which he says will only continue to improve itself with its intelligence. So a quote from him is that evolution creates structures and patterns that over time are more complicated, more knowledgeable, more intelligent, more creative, and more capable of expressing higher sentiments like being loved. Evolution is a spiritual process and makes us more godlike. So some thoughts from him. And this, of course, is Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is trying to put the brakes on some of this activity. He's the head of Tesla and SpaceX. He talks about AI as being the biggest existential threat that we face today. But he also thinks, recently he's talked about AI overtaking humans in less than 5 years. He thinks it's hubristic to think a computer cannot be as smart as a person, and is also investing in a company that has a brain-computer interface. A final thought on tempering this sort of thing is from Stephen Hawking, who said the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race, and it will take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. So back to the Vatican, in Rome in February, there was a call for an AI ethics, and it was spearheaded by the Pontifical Academy of Life with Archbishop Paglia, who's there in the photograph, co-signed by IBM and Microsoft, who are agreeing to collaborate on a human-centered way of designing AI. So this is to concentrate on putting humans at the center of all new technologies, asking for AI to be designed with a focus on the good of the environment, our common and shared home, and the human inhabitants first. So that's about all I have to say at the moment. I think these are fundamental questions for our human community. We need to think carefully about what we think of love, what we think of as a soul. Certainly, all these corporations are seeing humans and robots now as, rather than competing, as augmenting each other. But is that really what is going to happen in the future? And what does it mean for us as humans? And I'll pass on to Father Hugh.
Thank you very much. Let me just try and share my screen now. Thank you very much to the Catholic Union for inviting me, and for all of the participants, and for Jen for that fascinating, also frightening, I think, to some degree, talk. It is therefore, I think we can see quite important whether some of these claims are true. If we meet on the street something that looks like a human being and says, for instance, "I love you," it's quite important to know whether that might be true or not. And if we are convinced that someone or something does love us and we're wrong about it, I think that probably has quite significant repercussions for the human person, if love is what human beings are about. It certainly would be a shock if we found that the person we are in love with is in a zombie film, or we're in a zombie film. There's actually nothing behind the behavior of that thing that we're having a significant relationship with. Not good for our psyche, I would think. Or if we were to find that actually we're even worse in a sense, we're in a Truman Show where it's a sort of actor that we're actually talking to, following a predetermined script. Or if we find that we're in the Matrix and we have taken the blue pill, I think we recognize that it's not good for us. I'd go further. I think all of this ability to make claims without engaging, as the Catholic Union is engaging, with the issue and with the philosophy and with the philosophical debate about the nature of love and about the human being is irresponsible, because it's playing upon the human need for love. It's playing upon the undoubted ability, given perhaps our insecurities, to ascribe intentions and motives and self-consciousness and choice and free will to things that maybe are not worthy of having that ascribed to. So it is an important thing, and that we're engaging in, and I'm pleased that indeed, as we've heard, just last month, the Commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union said these words: the Christian perspective sees the human person as qualitatively different from other beings, with a transcendental dignity, intelligent and free, and capable, therefore, of moral acts. AI systems are not free in the sense the human person is, and in this sense, its acts cannot be judged according to the moral criteria that are applied to human acts. And it refers there to a document from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences a year before. Most maintain that robots cannot be considered as persons, so robots will not and should not be free agents or possess rights. Christian philosophy and theology states that the human soul is intrinsically incorruptible. This is the metaphysical foundation according to which the human person is in himself or herself free and capable of ethical order. Those words I put in red suggest a slight uncertainty about this, which I suppose is why we're doing these things. It points out Christian philosophy and theology does claim that the soul is intrinsically corruptible. Whether this slight uncertainty here has come from the fact that Christian philosophy and theology has not been very successful culturally recently in convincing people that humans have a spiritual, eternal soul, and that we have an intrinsic, absolute dignity different from all physical things. And maybe this document is aware that maybe, that we need to look carefully at this, and I'm going to try and do my little bit to contribute to that. Now, and maybe just throw in a little bit of awareness of how this Christian philosophy of the soul could be enriched by the richer scientific knowledge we have today. Here is my argument then. This is 3 syllogisms. You know what a syllogism is? The famous one is Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. And the thing about a syllogism is according to Western philosophy and Western reason and common sense, you have to believe the conclusion if you believe the premises. That's what a syllogism is. You don't, if you want to be a rational human being, if you believe both the premises, you have to believe the conclusion. So provided the syllogism is what's called a valid syllogism, I think this is a valid syllogism here, and I'm going to spend virtually no time on that at all, but just on the 4 premises here, mainly 3 of them. But first premise, humans have free will. The second one, matter is not free. Therefore, human free will is not a material power. That's, if you like, the first syllogism. Now that conclusion becomes a premise for the second syllogism. So we say human free will is not a material power. Love is freely willing the good of the other. Therefore, loving is not a material power. And then the final syllogism is taking that as a premise. Loving is not a material power. Robots are purely material things. Therefore, robots cannot love. Now, if you want to disagree with that conclusion, you have to at least disagree with either number 1 or number 2 or number 3 or number 4. Now you choose, make your choice now if you want. You can disagree with them all if you want, but you have to agree, you have to disagree. So I just want to shoot through those 4 premises, arguing that they are all true, and that therefore robots cannot love. And as I say, if you accept all four premises, you have to accept the conclusion that robots cannot love. First one is humans have free will. I just put in the stuff I'm focusing on in yellow. Humans have free will. I feel responsible, and we make others responsible by law. It's fundamental to our whole legal system that we believe people are responsible sometimes for their actions. Indeed, I experience myself making intelligent choices about values and intentionally enacting my body on that basis. In short, I could say this: I experienced that I could have done otherwise. I'm going to argue, I don't think a robot can truly say that. I experienced that I could have done otherwise. And indeed, this enables me to have friendships, which is what makes the world go round. So that's the basis of the first premise. And just a final little one here, actually, an important one. I think this is slightly more in the light of modern science. I think that as a result of such intelligent freedom, we range freely across our environment for goals which we create beyond our physical instincts or survival needs for good or ill. So I've put there someone who's climbed a mountain. Why did he climb a mountain? Well, because it's there, or because he wanted to. Not for a survival need, not determined by the mountain, but he chose to do it. Why do we go to the moon? Because we are explorers. Why do we go beyond limits? Why do we pollute the environment? Why do we do bad things? Well, because we want to be bad and we want to be selfish or whatever it is. Similarly, another angle on this is give me a limit and I think beyond it. Put someone there doing some mathematics, the mathematics of infinity, the ultimate limit, the absolute. We are human beings not satisfied by relative things. We'll always think beyond and consider going beyond any limit that we are given. So that is the first premise. There are common objections to those premises. Freedom is an illusion. There are only material powers, and material powers, if we accept the second premise, are not free, which many even atheists do, of course, today. Then freedom is an illusion. And the second objection: there are always reasons why we do things, perhaps complex. These may not be obvious, but they cause our actions. I was nasty because I just hated that person, or I went up the mountain because I wanted some exercise or something like that. And these actually cause. So we need to reply to those objections. What I want to do in basing my reply to those objections, and it's sort of just further basing that first premise, if you like, but also, as we'll see, the other premises. Just quote something from St. John Henry Newman from the Grammar of Assent, and I'll come back to those two objections. So this is just taking this first premise a little bit deeper, okay? A little bit of, he was a philosopher. We are in a world of facts, he says, and we use them, for there is nothing else to use. We do not quarrel with them, but we take them as they are and avail ourselves of what they can do for us. It would be out of place to demand of fire, water, air, earth, their credentials, so to say, for acting upon us or ministering to us. We call them elements and turn them to account and make the most of them. We speculate on them at our leisure. But what we are still less able to doubt about or annul at our leisure is that which is at once their counterpart and their witness. I mean ourselves. We are conscious of the objects of external nature. We reflect upon them and act upon them. And this consciousness, reflection and action we call our rationality. And we use the so-called elements, matter, without first criticizing what we have no command over. So it is much more unmeaning in us to criticize or find fault with our own nature, which is nothing else than we ourselves. Instead of using it according to the use of which it ordinarily admits, our being with its faculties of mind and body is not admitting of question, all things being of necessity referred to it, not to other things. I'm going to skip the rest of that, look it up, it's great. So just to answer those objections, it is an illusion. There are only material powers. That is what it was actually said by Hobbes in the 17th century, but supported by Bacon, and became actually a major way of thinking today. And I think the people who Jen's quoting are within this way of thinking personally, although I know that we need to engage with the Eastern thought and Taoism and Buddhism, etc., as well. But I think this is a common thing, particularly in our culture. So my answer to this is, in the light of what Newman says there, human self-determination and responsibility is a fundamental power in my experience. That is to say, there is no reason to say that our experience of material causes, in which they're predictable, is the only type of cause. Yes, that's also a fundamental experience, But to say that anything else must be reduced to material causation is, in my opinion, I think a prejudice, and it's not one that Newman would agree, or modern people, phenomenologists or personalists, or indeed people before Hobbes, Catholic thinkers before the 17th century, did recognize that there's a fundamental datum and affirmation, which is human self-determination and responsibility. As already said, we'll come back to this, we are not satisfied with material things. There are always reasons for me to want and do things which are perhaps complex, yes, but we, in our experience and in our behaviors, appear to create our own evaluations and reasons. Even transcending objective good, we can do bad things. We self-determine the type of person we are. If we're asked, why act like that? We say, because I want to. Now, you might want to come back to these objections, but that's a little bit of a introduction. The second premise, matter is not free. What I'm saying here, when I'm talking about matter, I'm talking about those things that our five senses, our sight, our touch, our hearing, our smell, actually engage with their immediate object. The more we understand matter through modern science, the more we can predict it. Mobile phones work well. There's an insight from modern science that the actions, which was there to some degree before modern science as well, but it's been enriched. Actions of physical things are determined by the thing's nature and its environment. There is a mutual playoff between nature and environment, and the thing which survives through evolution gains a foothold within an ecological niche, and therefore things are specifically limited by that niche, and it's all predictable and understandable to some degree as we grow in science. The claim here is it could not have been otherwise. Okay, if we accept both those two premises, we end up with this conclusion. Human free will is not a material power. If we accept humans have free will, matter, as we immediately experience it under our senses, is not free. Therefore, human free will is not a material power. Love involves free will, is the third one. Sorry, I've got a couple of objections to the second premises, which is matter is not free. People say material things may have freedom. Witness quantum mechanics can allow uncaused events. Clever animals might be non-determined and even intelligently choosing. The first one, to answer the first one, well, as I say, my first premise was based upon material things as humans normally experience them. Basically, not at the very low level quantum level, where there seems to be probabilistic situations and possibly even uncaused events. But as I say in my second point there, being uncaused does not mean intelligent freedom, does not mean the creating of goals and the suggesting of goals and the following of goals. The second objection to the second premise, clever animals might be non-determined and even intelligently choosing. As I said, they exist. Even the clever ones we know now exist within ecological niches, and they exist if they are successful within their niches and their behavior is understood by an engagement with that. The classic thing in evolutionary theory is, one of them is niche partitioning in warblers, that each subspecies of warbler goes for a particular part of the conifer tree, and it's fine-tuned through evolution to go for that part of the conifer tree, because throughout evolution you only get one species for each ecological niche according to the resources, and that goes up to dolphins, etc. So from their behavior there's no evidence that they transcend that dynamic. And similarly differently with human beings, we do go beyond ecological niches. We do things which are not relevant to survival. We go to the moon, as I've pointed out. We can engage with infinity in a self-conscious, meaningful way. Okay, so, and I've just put another little thing there, that actually these ecological niches, a classic thing within biology here, the levels of ecological niche going through hydrogen, atoms, molecules, cells, organs, communities, ecosystems, and then the whole biosphere down here, the whole planet Earth is, of course, an ecosystem. There are layers of meaning which are highly well understood. And we haven't yet found a behavior that doesn't fit in to that deterministic dynamic. So that we get from those two things, human free will is not a material power. Love is freely willing the good of the other. If a human being says, I love you, but it turns out you are pointing a gun at them, or are a zombie or an actor in the Truman Show, you don't believe them, do you? You don't believe that they love you, because this free will, which I've just attempted to prove, is being enacted and is necessary for us to want to freely will the importance of another person, is what love is. And I'm just going to move swiftly. Therefore, if you accept that in the light of the conclusion that I claim to have shown here, you cannot but accept loving is not a material power, if you accept the three premises. And finally, we move on to the fourth and final premise. Robots are purely material things. To clinch this argument that robots cannot love is where we've got to now, okay? Robots are based upon, current robots are based upon digital computer technology. My claim is that they are purely matter. Computers model mathematical interactions of the physical behavior of things. We have to produce those mathematical interactions, and they're purely based upon the physical behavior of things. That is what a word means in a computer. It doesn't refer to the self-conscious free will that Newman points out is our starting point. And indeed, other philosophical systems, but Newman did it so well that we cannot deny it without contradicting ourselves. As I showed from Newman's quote, I suppose it's something we automatically affirm, that we exist with a particular self-conscious free will, which is also intelligent. That is not modeled. What is modeled is the results of that, because it's a digital computer. They do not have a personal subject of action. They do not have intellect and will. Now, a way this has been shown by the philosopher John Searle is his Chinese room argument. Well, he says, if you imagine this person here who's English and does not speak any Chinese is in a room, and someone puts Chinese symbols in the in box here, he takes them out and he has a book saying, when you see these three Chinese symbols in a row, put this answer out. He just has a rule book out the other end. Meanwhile, this person walks around here and he might have asked, you know, what color's your hair? And it comes out, it is black. And he might have asked, whatever it is, do you love me? And it comes out, no. He might have asked, do you understand Chinese? It comes out, no, if he's being honest, if he's being true. And the fact is, this guy can start to think that the person inside the room has an understanding of Chinese. Well, the room does, as a whole, maybe. But neither is true, because there is simply an arbitrary rule book put, it's not art, it's a rule book for Chinese, but expressed in arbitrary symbols, just like a computer is. So another way of putting that is their hardware, the hardware of digital computers is electrons, capacitors, etc. Their software is like a rule book. You can predict computers. No one can map their future choices of humans because they are not determined, as I showed in premise 1. So if Jen was to, or someone was to say when Jen was, you know, speaking computer answers, if someone had asked her this question, or say they'd asked the question, and he responded with this, yes, I experienced that I could have done otherwise. Well, that is triply false. There is no I there coordinating the dynamic there. There is, in fact, not even subjective experience, which we haven't even discussed here, but there's no reason or no good theory for saying that they would have subjective experience, but particularly there is no freedom, because freedom is a non-material thing. And the hardware, which is acting in patterned ways, written in by the human person, is purely material. And there is no reason for saying otherwise. Now, a question we might want to talk in the question time is, could we create something that would have a soul? Of course, the fact that humans are non-material, this is, you know, moving away from the argument a tiny bit, we believe is because God has created the soul. It's a reasonable position to take for a non-material item. The power of freedom comes from what we call soul. Could they create something? Possibly. That's something to discuss. Could they create something that God would create a soul into? Well, that's a different talk. Why does God, and when does God create souls? Does he create souls into cats or stones? I don't think he does. Why not? We need to perhaps discuss that. But the basis of my argument remains, humans have free will. Matter is not free. Therefore, the power of freedom is not a material power. Love is freely willing the good of the other. Love is not a material power. Robots are material things. Therefore, robots cannot love. So were we to meet something that is a digital computer on the street that looks like a human being, there is no reason for us to believe if it said I'm loving, or that I have self-consciously chosen, or that I'm freely willing you're good, or that I generously care about your importance. It's important to know that. And we can know that it wouldn't be true in the case of robots. And that's an important conclusion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. That was a superb. Can you hear me, first of all? Yeah, that was a superb 2 talks. On the one hand, scary, and on the other, very carefully reasoned. There haven't yet been that many questions, so I'm going to ask you a couple. One arises a bit at the end, from the end of your talk, Father Hugh.
Yeah.
As you said, computers are at root binary. They're electronic. So information is going in, it's being processed in an electronic form, and it's going out again. The two aspects of what's going on are these. One, that very few people understand what's going on. Very few people understand the technology. It's highly complex and it requires real sort of skill. The other thing that's going on is that these are commercial organizations trying to sell a product. Is there a danger that people are actually being taken for a ride in all this?
Yeah,
there's a friend of mine who when faced recently with a computer system which claimed to be able to make judicial decisions, who's actually a very senior lawyer, described it as snake oil. Is there an element of that?
Yeah, clearly, and I think from Jen's talk that's been shown to be the case. And as you say, not everybody can understand these things. And as in all of our life, we are called to trust others who have more knowledge and more wisdom in whatever area of life that we are talking in and that we are growing in, and not least even in our relationships. We need to have advisors and etc. So in this case, as the document from the bishops pointed out, we need good philosophy and theology, some people to do it, in harmony with revelation about the creation of the spiritual soul. And I think, as I pointed out, it's shown there that we need to work on that perhaps even more, and it's getting more urgent. And so we need the value of trust also renewed within our society, so that the scientists and the people producing this take responsibility for what they're saying. And there is a debate about this, so at the very least we have to engage in that debate and not shut people up about it or pretend it's not there.
What's very encouraging, I think, just to pick up off that, Father Hugh, is that companies like IBM are encouraging. I spoke to Christina Montgomery, who's the Chief Privacy Officer at IBM, yesterday for an interview. And they're working very much with the philosophy departments of universities now. So both, I know Microsoft and IBM are encouraging their scientists to engage with philosophy and humanities and these things, and putting in AI ethics programs at universities like Notre Dame in America.
That answers the next question I was going to ask you. How seriously are serious philosophers engaging with this? The next question goes on. I'll ask it in a slightly different way than it's been asked, but hopefully this gets a number of questions into the one. The use of the word artificial intelligence. There is a school of thought. So I went to a talk recently by an Oxford professor on this, that actually that's a misnomer, that that actually technology hasn't reached the stage where there's such thing as artificial intelligence. We're still at root dealing with the same computer processes that we always have. They're just faster and more complicated. Is that fair or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't use the word intelligence in my talk, but I suppose it was there in the sense that if we're using the word intelligence as human intelligence, that is to say that which bases free will, then absolutely what I've shown is that digital computers cannot have that. And the bishops do say we definitely need a proper definition of artificial intelligence. And there were a few moves, reading those documents I quoted, a few moves, I think, vaguely in the right direction, actually, about, looked quite positive, I thought, from the EU Commission of trying to say, well, maybe we've got to be very careful with this phrase, artificial intelligence, yeah.
Because there's a difference between narrow artificial intelligence and general artificial intelligence, which is the general artificial intelligence, I suppose, is more what Kurzweil is talking about, if it achieves singularity. But narrow artificial intelligence is more of things with deep learning and machine learning that we access every day in our lives on our phones and through apps and things like that, which is just processing vast amounts of data very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, but it's exactly that. It's processing data, isn't it?
That's right. According to our models of physical behavior of things, including human beings,
Yes.
which it can be somewhat accurate, never totally accurate, because we're free. We'll never predict the future. Like we can predict the future of a computer, but you cannot predict the future of a human being.
You can't. Do you think you can always predict the future of the computer? Because now some of these programs are so deep and so much information is involved that it's very difficult to understand what is going on there.
If it's a digital computer, then the complexity obviously may be beyond us. But if it is a digital computer in which the software is a mathematical model, which it has to be, of physical observable behavior placed upon the hardware, then I think, I think you can predict it. Yeah.
And in a sense, a follow-on question from that, when you talk about a robot having a soul or a robot being able to love, that really depends on what you mean by a soul or what you mean by love. And it was telling that in Jen's talk, she referred to a Japanese religious philosophy almost. There's no one suggesting that a robot would have a soul in the sense that we would understand it as Catholics. No. And when you talk about a robot loving, are they really just saying that they can recreate a reaction that looks like a human reaction? Jen's example of the freezing robot when she got angry, or shivering robot.
If you take my third premise, and define love as freely giving of oneself, freely willing the good of the other, then it's not clear that the Buddhist philosophy would take that into account at all. Therefore, as you say, its view of soul is certainly not our view of soul. I would just flag up here, and I notice there's a couple of questions that's come up actually. One of them is on feelings. That I didn't talk about the phenomenon of awareness, of subjective awareness, which is a different debate. So just to flag that up, that if the Eastern philosophy just sees soul as some sort of panpsychism where everything has an awareness, that's a different debate in which I'd probably have a little bit more sympathy to that sort of view. But in terms of free, intelligent action, which is at the heart of what love is, then I just don't think the Eastern philosophy can cope with that analysis, for instance, from Newman, that this is something that humans have, which is more than matter, but is exercised through the body, through matter. That is a specific philosophy that numerous Western philosophers are moving towards, I would argue today, but is rooted in the Catholic tradition ultimately, and certainly not one that Eastern thought can easily take on board, and therefore they would have to lose that fundamental analysis of, phenomenological analysis of the human person, and indeed of his behavior of going beyond ecological niches. So again, they're not taking account of modern evolutionary theory either. But panpsychism, I would have a certain interest in, but that's a different issue.
Okay. Someone here has said, and this, I've heard that computers are now able to learn from their experience of their activities, which moves them into the realm of independence of human interventions. Is this true? And I suppose that is the hook that a lot of these artificial intelligence salespeople are using to argue that they have discovered or they are creating something groundbreaking.
I mean, it's true. It is true, because we've seen artificial intelligences that have won games of poker, Jeopardy, chess, Go. So they're certainly learning from their experiences of their activities and improving exponentially. And I think this is the thing. I mean, I'd like to hear what Father Hugh has to think, but I don't see how we can't think that they are teaching themselves things that we won't possibly understand quite how they're doing that, because it's difficult for us to understand at a certain point.
Well, given that the whole universe is mathematical, mapping certain parts of it, in the physical universe, can enable us to infer to other parts. Now, independence of us is not a problem. I don't think we were arguing about whether they're independent or dependent today. A certain degree of independence is not a problem. I wouldn't object to that. I would again say that when you use the word learn, you have to be careful about what you mean by learn. If you mean a sort of increasing independence of what was initially programmed in terms of engaging with this mathematical world that physically we live in, then fine. If you're talking about the soul, if you're talking about the subject of action, developing his appreciation of goodness and badness in a self-conscious way, then my argument has completely ruled out that sense of learning from digital computers.
Yeah.
There's, and I suppose then the last question, because we're getting towards 8 o'clock. There are some people who are for example, in these big consultancy firms, who have these huge databases, which they sell out to do various things. Some of them say that actually they have inputs and outputs, but they don't actually know how the computer gets from one to the other. They know it does get from one to the other, but they don't know how. And so the question is, what's going on there?
Do you want to answer that, Father Hugh?
Is that related to the previous question, if I understood it? Are you saying, when you say one to the other, what, can you just clarify? That
actually that they're getting to the stage where these computer programs have become so complicated that that they don't actually, that the designers and those, or at least those who operate them, don't actually understand how the computer gets from the input to the output.
Yeah, that's another aspect of independence, which is, in terms of it's a frightening thing. I mean, I agree with Jen. Jen sort of highlighted that, and we need to look at that. But I wouldn't deny that they can have independence. I don't think that affects the argument about whether they can love. But that's another factor of it. So absolutely, I'm not, that even if the whole world were to accept that robots can't love, there would still be massive ethical issues about, clearly not about giving them rights, which would be crazy, but clearly about how they can be used, and can they be let loose, and how can we make sure that they take into account in their modeling and in their ability to engage with human behavior, morality and things like that. That would be.
I mean, Father Hugh, I'm just curious, because you said that you can't give them rights, but how would you feel if you saw somebody abusing a robot on a factory line in front of you? Would you feel anything?
Well, no, I wouldn't. If it's a digital computer, I wouldn't. I mean, obviously, we should respect good creations. And, you know, if you destroy an aspect of the environment, or take a beautiful statue and destroy it, or destroy a car, you know, there are certain, you know, values that we need to engage when we deal with well-made, well-intentioned artifacts. But in no way is there, can we give them moral values based upon free will? And as I say, we haven't even discussed the awareness question, which is also an important question, but you know, is a different question. But I mean, clearly animals have awareness, but they don't have free will, I've argued, for instance. But I don't think they would have, I mean, if you want my answer for do digital computers have awareness? No, I'm fairly sure they don't, but that's a different argument, you know.
And what about that question of people not understanding how a computer they've designed comes to the decision that it has? Is that a widespread problem?
I don't
know what's going on.
Oh yeah, Jenkins. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking. I think that is something that I've heard a lot. I mean, it's just what's going on is that once you use such a vast amount of data, and it's impossible to sort of for a human mind to be across it. And I guess that's what Kurzweil is saying, that in the future we'll be connected directly to the cloud, and we can enhance our brains in that fashion that the computers are enhanced. So we just don't have the power to process all of the information that's going on those levels. So once you've set an algorithm going, I suppose, and fed it millions and millions of data points, at some point you won't be able to know what's going on and how it's built on its decisions. It's very difficult to unpack that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, it's all pretty. I was going to say terrifying, but it's reality, so you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But it is a great spur to responsibility, and a great spur to discovering, to try and understand a bit more about what's going on, and B, to create a bulwark of sort of ethics and realism, so that human autonomy and human beings are protected.
I mean, it's great because people are engaging with it, but like Elon Musk does say some other very frightening things. I mean, he thinks that this is more dangerous than nuclear weapons. He says, 6 people working on this could disrupt the whole world potentially, and that there's not enough regulation on these matters happening around the world. I mean, it's very pleasing to see the Vatican and different corporations getting involved in the ethical side of this, but how we engage with other actors in the world, I think it's something that we need to really think about seriously.
Yeah.
Good opportunity for Catholics to engage in this.
And this question is a sort of basic question, but it doesn't answer all those other ones. I think, there is a question there we haven't directly dealt with. I don't know, from Tony Coyne there about if a robot is. Shall I quickly?
Yeah, do fire away.
On that, I mean, if it says if a robot is programmed to have feelings towards humans, is there a responsibility on humans to treat robots with care and respect? I mean, as I've tried to say, programming is just humans understanding mathematical patterns in the world and placing them upon a hardware. Now, it would be another talk, but I don't think that can produce feelings. But possibly other things could produce feelings, like animal feelings, not freedom, but awareness. And once you have awareness, it might be through some Eastern panpsychism that awareness arises. It's another discussion. But once you have awareness, clearly our way of evaluating those types of things is different from things that don't have awareness. So I would question Tony's use of the word programmed, but if we were to build something, I think it would have to be far more biological to have feelings and far more tuned into its ecological niche than a digital computer can possibly be. But if we were to, there would be some sort of responsibility, as there is for us towards animals. Now, again, slightly different talk. What is our responsibility towards animals? I'd say a sort of qualified yes to that. Yeah.
And there's a question there from Mary as well. In the case of complexity, how can we know the computer is wrong if we cannot understand the process?
Yeah, good question.
It's a good question. Yeah. I mean, the answer is this is the reason we need the field of ethics and why we need to engage with this. we need to also know where the data sets are coming from. We need to know, there's so many different biases that can be built into that information that's feeding the computers. It's very, 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 very complex. And this is why we need whole departments. I mean, the IBM Ethics Board, for example, were telling me that they meet twice a week to talk about these things in their businesses. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah, but again, that they're within technology companies. There needs to be some outside,
Yes.
which both understands the technology, which is a problem in itself, and is sufficiently rigorous ethically and philosophically,
yes,
to set the bar. Father Rajiv actually has said that this has asked if it can be replicated. The fact that we can't fully understand, is it simply a matter of complexity which is theoretically within our grasp, or is it something that actually is beyond what we're capable of understanding?
Well, for a digital computer, the argument I've presented today is that it's the former.
Yes.
That, it is simply electrons and protons, and it only works well to the degree to which the electrons and protons and capacitors deterministically interact through transistors, etc. But because they have mathematical patterns which capture dynamics within the real world, they come out with intelligible results, but they have to be interpreted by us. So it is, I think the type of independence and inability to know whether it's right and things like that is to do with complexity, I would say, not an intrinsic inability to predict how a computer would act, unlike human beings, where there is an intrinsic inability to predict how they will choose.
Yes. Excellent. Well, I think we've only scratched the surface. I think we've done well in an hour. So thank you both very much. Excellent. And thank you everyone for attending. And we'll let you know about our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.